Welcome to Videopeom. We have a very special guest today, George Ortega, and the topic is going to be on poverty. Hi, George.
How you doing, Bob?
So, I wanted to have you on to talk about poverty, how it's under the radar and it's overlooked by the commercial media. Why don't you tell my guests some interesting facts that you've acquired about that?
All right. This is something that most people don't know, but it's the biggest tragedy, the biggest injustice in the world. I mean, look, there are 29,000 kids dying every day from poverty. That comes to like 10.5 million a year. And I mean, when you want to put it into like historical perspective, Hitler and the Nazis killed what, about 12 million people in however many years they did. This is going on every year, 10 million kids. And, it's not that the facts aren't out there. This has been going on for decades.
Why do you think that's not reported as much in the media? And the follow-up question to that is, if you think it was reported, do you think it would affect people's actions and awareness of it?
Absolutely. The reason it's not reported is because pretty much the rich own the world. The rich own the media, the rich own the government, the rich own corporations. And they're actually misinformed. They think that ending global poverty would cost them a lot of money, when the fact is that we could together end global poverty, and they wouldn't even miss the money. It's such a small amount.
So you think they have an agenda in keeping this poverty going? I mean, you're saying like if we educated them, I mean, why wouldn't they be aware of that?
All right. One of the reasons they're not aware of it is because our politicians generally aren't aware of it. We get new Congress people into Congress each, election cycle. And there are a lot of issues out there. There are a lot of lobbyists. So they're like, people are coming from them to them left and right. And there's one fact that explains the global poverty situation very clearly in terms of how little we do and how little it takes to get done. This is like the 0.7% pledge. Let me explain that. Back in 1970, through the UN, the 22 richest countries determined, they did a study commissioned by the UN, it was headed by Canada, and they determined that all it would take to end global poverty was 0.7% of the annual income of the richest 22 countries.
You mean like the gross domestic
Product? Exactly. The GDP every year, less than 1%. And those 22 countries promised that amount, back in 1970, and they pledged to actually fulfill it by 1975. Now here we are 37 years later, and they haven't given even half of that.
Well, what's interesting, that brings up an interesting thing, is how it gets reported in our media, and a lot of Americans think like how generous we are. But if you actually study like the policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, a lot of what we give through that is tied to take away the resources of those countries, to sustain our lifestyle here. Like for instance, like cases like down in Venezuela, like or like in those countries too, like where we privatize the water, the electricity, and you find like those gains flowing back to corporations here, where basic necessities for the people down there, they'd have to do without.
Oh, absolutely. And also, like, Africa is the part of the world that needs the most help. I mean, there's a lot of poverty in China and Asia, but in Africa, the poverty is so extreme, they don't have even the resources to begin. But we will pump a lot of money, for example, into Israel, into countries that don't really need it. It's really, a lot of our foreign aid, as you're saying, it's for our benefit. It's not for the benefit of the recipients.
And it's not even really for, when you say our benefit, it's really for the corporate benefit, don't you mean?
Benefit of the rich, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, for instance, like, well, when you go into like Noam Chomsky, he talks about like we create client states. Israel's a client state in the sense of they'll be our proxy in that part of the world to do our bidding and stuff. So therefore, we give them aid, and but is that in the interest of the average American? By giving this aid to the Israelis, nothing against them, it creates this hostility with like the Arab population,
Right.
which is directed towards the whole American population, when in reality, they're giving the aid to Israel for the benefit of, let's say, the oil lobby, who
Yeah.
wants a strong man in that region.
Yeah, and the reality is, again, we're talking about 0.7% of our income each year. I mean, to make it understandable, if our income was $50,000 as an individual, that would be $350 a year.
Doesn't
So
America also like rank like way low on the list of what we give? I think I heard 37. I don't know if that's right.
all right, well, there are 22 donor countries that signed this pledge. Until 2004, the United States gave the least. We were at the very bottom of that
Yeah.
list. Now we're second to bottom. Yeah.
But meanwhile, like you'll get the reporting, let's say on Fox and other corporate things, like how generous we are, what we're doing, and I think a lot of Americans go around with that notion in their head, with that sound bite in their head, and then when something happens, then they get like, oh, we're misunderstood. People are ungrateful.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a perfect example. The average person thinks that we give 25% of our federal budget to foreign aid. The reality is we give less than 1%. So people are incredibly misinformed.
Right, that brings up an interesting thing too. Like for instance, like Bush, I think it was like in State of the Union 3 years ago, said something like where he was gonna give all this money for AIDS stuff in Africa, and he said that. But in reality, when the budget comes due, the Appropriations Committee, they gave 1% of the figure that he stated. But that is not reported. In other words, people hear that when he gives the State of the Union speech in January, they hear this great glowing number. Oh, wow, we're going to do it. And then when push comes to shove, 3 or 4 months later, when they actually go to sign the money, it's like minuscule compared to what they're saying. But that is not reported. People aren't aware. So they're going around with this notion like, oh, we're doing something about it, when in fact we're not.
Yeah, and the problem is that the rich pretty much own the press. I mean, we think it's a free press, but if it's owned by individuals like Murdoch who are incredibly wealthy and have their agenda, I mean, we're not going to get the news. I mean, what we need, I mean, like, 150, 200 years ago or so, we had revolutions against the monarchies. But most people think it went from like the monarchies to the people, that there was really democracy to the people. It wasn't. It was the rich took the power from the monarchy. They have the power now. We need a new revolution against the rich, because they're just like destroying the planet.
Right, you mentioned an interesting point in an email to me. I say it's not going to be a violent revolution. How did you describe how it was going to be?
No, and it's political. I think we've advanced beyond the point where we don't need to destroy millions of lives to change the world. I mean, with the internet, with politics, with just mobilization and activism, we could do it. But the thing is, we have to get involved. We have to understand the facts.
But you were also mentioning it would be a psychological revolution.
Well, yeah, a lot of times we have a culture that kind of, in a sense, idolizes the rich. We look up to them. We admire them. We kind of want to be like them.
Right, lifestyles and the rich and the famous, right?
Yeah. So that's got to change. And I think what's going to help change that is global warming.
Do you think that's going to change it? Because they were saying, for instance, when Thomas Frank and What's the Matter with Kansas was talking about this phenomenon in the last 30 years, how lower working class people and even poor people have voted, say, for the Republican Party, which is completely against their economic interests, and they've gone for it. And he explored that topic in his book, and what he was saying was he found a myth, where people want to believe, they want to believe in that American dream, okay, I'm not so fortunate right now, but I will have the opportunity to get there, or if not me, my child. And then he actually explored the data, was saying, no, most people don't get in that myth. Their children don't get in that myth. Their grandchildren don't get in that myth.
Exactly.
But that is perpetrated, and then you get the focus on lifestyles, which is the famous, and the cult of celebrity and stuff. People just going off on that. I was watching TV last night, and if I heard one more anecdote about Michael Vick and the dog story, which is that is a tragic story, and I don't mean to minimize that, but I was just looking at it there's so much more going on. I was talking to my yoga teacher today too, was saying how she noticed in the news they're saying, oh, fortunate Hurricane Dean is going to Cancun, as if the people in Cancun didn't matter.
Right.
Oh, it's not going to these rich resort towns in Louisiana or Texas. Oh, it's the poor people. They don't matter.
A lot of the problem is in the United States is we're very nationalistic. It's always about us first. Again, there's 29,000 kids dying every day of poverty. 3,000 of us died in 9/11, and like we can't get over that. It's 3,000 in one day versus like 29,000 every day. I mean, we have to get over this mindset that it's America first, and the rest of the world has to wait.
Right, and also there's a thing too, like how Americans like Gore Vidal coined the phrase "United States of Amnesia."
Oh yeah.
In other words, just no Americans don't have any historical awareness. Like you had the tech boom collapse. What goes on now? They rush right into this mortgage housing thing. Now it's collapsing, and they're crying again. Like you look at it. Didn't you learn your lesson 7 years ago? Now what?
Well, again, I mean, the reason for that is like the media is going to play up what's in the best interest of the people who own the media. So if it's not in the best interest to point up things that are going to end global poverty or take care of children's health care, they're not going to do it.
Well, are you aware of the fact too, since there's been this consolidation of media, that to make more profits for their shareholders, they've been cutting back on the foreign bureaus? Like, as a matter of fact, there's only two news organizations that maintain like a bureau in Iraq. That's the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. No one else is like so. As just like say, you were talking about this global poverty problem, particularly in Africa. There's less and less even means of covering it because they want to maximize the profits to the shareholders. They're not really caring about the news. Like I saw a thing on C-SPAN 2 nights ago where they're saying like how when they hire graduates out of the journalism programs, they don't want someone who can go and do research. They want someone who looks sexy and who can tell a cute story. And
Yeah.
that's what this guy was saying. Like he's a professor, and the companies come to him, they tell him what they want, and he has to train people to be like that because he wants to do well by his graduates. But he was saying how it sickens him because he knows like they're going out there to do fluff pieces.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. When they do a piece, they might do a piece of a malnourished child, and then maybe like a care worker or something like that. Very topical, very direct, showing people. But they don't give stories about why that situation is like that. For example, we trade with our trading partners that are often the rich countries, and
You
we
mean like the Western European, like the G7, or
yeah, exactly. Our major trading partners that are not poor countries, and we charge them like if an African country wants to trade with us, they'll have to pay, for example, tariffs that are 9 times higher than our rich partners. Africa, as poor as they are, if we really had free trade, if the United States and the rich countries traded with them, they could lift themselves out of poverty completely. They wouldn't need our help.
no? What parts of Africa are you talking about? Like when you say Africa, I mean it's a continent.
Right.
So I mean there's South Africa, then there's Egypt, then there's Morocco.
Sure, it's basically sub-Saharan. Sub-Saharan. That's where the major
Because it's
poverty.
very interesting, like how where we have some interest in Africa, it's like Nigeria. Lo and behold, there's oil there. Now Chad, they discovered oil there. And the case, like for instance, in Nigeria is very sad, is that we, in collusion with like the Western European nations, have helped propped up violent military dictators who have given their oil to our oil companies at a very good price, and we've looked the other way while they've tortured people, funneled no resources back to the population, um, just taking the profits either for the oil company here or for like a very small elite in that country and stuff. So, and you don't get that reporting. So, when there's anger comes back, and then you get like, oh, we're like this generous country. Why are they acting this
Yeah,
way?
we blame those countries.
Why are
for
they
how-
acting this way? And I just think about it. I was like coming through White Plains the other day, and like I felt like swamped by the land of the huge SUV.
Yeah,
You know,
well,
it's like it's
Bob-
that awareness, like going like I don't care about these people that in Nigeria as long as I can drive comfortably in my huge SUV. Nothing against huge SUVs, but like I'm saying, isn't it? I mean, we're not in the 90s anymore. Cheap oil. What's going on here?
we're worse than the Nazis. Again, we don't care. We really just don't care. It's kind of ironic because like 90% of us are religious. We tend to believe that there's a God and there's justice, whatever. And if that's the case, we're in for some hard times because like the way we've treated, half of the planet, 1.1 billion who are living on less than $1 a day. These again, the kids are dying at a rate of 29,000 every day. I mean, if there's justice, then what goes around comes around, and we can expect that things may
So
not be
you're
so
not
good
buying
for
like the
us.
free market argument that globalization is gonna like it's a rising tide and it's gonna lift everyone up.
If it was, I mean, the gains that have been made in global poverty have been made mainly in China, and because of the globalization, because of free trade, they've done a lot. But free trade is far from free. I mean, again, China's had a lot more leverage than the African countries. If we applied the free trade principles to Africa, again, they could lift themselves out of poverty.
But it's interesting with China too. Like now that the jobs are leaving there because it's too expensive for these people there. So they're now pretty much going to Vietnam and Malaysia.
That's right. I mean, the jobs. I mean, like,
So there's already
that's fine.
unrest in China now because it's not having that same model. And another interesting fact is too in the desperation to get China to develop, we had them develop on an oil economy where they could have come in on a green one.
Well, yeah, that's the problem. I mean, like right now, I mean, global warming is going to be a problem for decades. If we don't do something soon, we risk shrinking the global economy by about 20%. Okay, so it's serious. Now, the problem is that here in the United States, our per capita income is about 42,000. Okay, in China, it's about 4,000. The problem with that is that as of this year, China is now emitting as much CO2 into the atmosphere as the United States. And so, I mean, like, while we may have the money to cut down our emissions substantially enough to address it, China cannot do that and feed its people. So,
And keep its growth. Like
exactly.
they're addicted to, I think like they need to have like 10 to 14% growth every year,
Right,
and
right.
that's what they're planning on. Another interesting thing too is they're going to be competing for the same oil resources that we are. Like we turn like our back on Iran, well, guess who steps into the void? China's there.
Yeah. And in a way, it's better if they do because, again, we're people. We're not Americans first. We're human beings first. So if the poor countries take all the trade, if the United States gets much poorer, that's good for a lot of people. That'll save a lot of lives.
Well, what's interesting too is like they also hold up, say, India as this great model, like particularly Thomas Friedman of the Times. But the same thing, like similar to here, is that the benefits of the globalization in that continent is only going to a few, and that's only that what gets reported here is like the successes of pockets of India, and there's actually more starvation, more destitution in that country than before and stuff. But that doesn't get reported. Just the gains to a certain elite gets manifested here, and that's all gets trumpeted. So people hear that, and that's all they think.
Yeah. And again, like the people who keep other people poor in India are the rich. India could have addressed its poverty decades ago. It's finally making some progress, not nearly enough. But just like we have the rich in our country that just wants more and more at the expense of everything else, everyone else, there are people like that in every country of the world. That's why we need a revolution against the rich, a global revolution.
Well, yeah, it's interesting now that when you bring the focus up in this country, how we were talking before about how the big economic gains of the last 30 years in this country have gone to the top 100% of this country.
Top 1%, you're saying, or
No, no,
0.1?
100% of that,
100%.
0.0001
Right, right, yeah.
and stuff. Even within the rich, there's levels and stuff. So even within their class, the Times did a whole expose on that. Even within them, you have rich, but it's not merely satisfactory enough like that $5 or $10 million. That's actually poor
Right.
by those people's standards and stuff. And what do you have? They're cutting taxes more. I was telling you a fact that corporations have had their taxes since 1962 slashed by 2/3 of the revenue that they contribute to the federal budget. What's wrong with that?
Yeah, I know. 85% of corporations don't pay any taxes at all. The Democrats are far from perfect. The Democrats should have been championing global poverty for decades. But right now, the main problem with the rich controlling the world in this country is the Republicans. They're the ones that are giving the. I'm not saying that.
Well, you're
Again,
not different than that.
all right, but I'm not saying that the Democrats are perfect. But like, in order to defend the planet again, especially within the perspective of global warming, and the Republicans, the Democrats are much more in favor of doing what's necessary. I mean, you can't do everything at once. You can't in a sense, weaken both the Democrats and the Republicans at the same time, because one of them is going to rise to power. And like, to the extent that the Democrats win and the Republicans lose power, all right, then we don't have to worry about the Republicans, just like we don't have to worry about the fascists or the Nazis anymore. Then we work on the Democrats. We work on making them a lot more compassionate.
So you're saying work within the system in that case?
We have to work by steps. We've got to first get rid of the Republicans. You know, their ideology.
Well, I'm just saying, like, when the conversation veers into that topic, for instance, like one of Hillary Clinton's biggest contributors is Rupert Murdoch. So when he just acquired the Dow Jones, not a word out of her. I'm saying if we're going to be, one of the themes of this, what we've been talking about is media consolidation and reporting certain interests. Well, she just rolled over on that.
Oh yeah, again.
So how are we going to change it? I don't want to get too. That's another topic for another show.
Well, no. I mean, like, it's very relevant to global poverty because you've got the parties, right? But the rich control both parties.
But I'm saying, like, for instance, in the Democratic primary right now, the only candidate or speaking even of poverty is John Edwards.
Right.
And how do they treat him? They talk about his haircut.
I know that's
they call him the haircut candidate. Like, he just did this thing where he reenacted this famous trip that Robert Kennedy did in '68 to like really destitute counties in Kentucky and stuff, and they mocked him.
They made fun of him. I know.
They
That's
made
how
fun
they
of
are.
him. That
That's
Newsweek journalist was saying this is so boring. This is ridiculous.
And I mean, you've got people in power. You've got people who work for the people in power that are just callous. They're indifferent. They're not compassionate. They don't care. They're selfish. They're greedy. And, you know, again, like, it's, you know, if we don't, there's a saying that goes like, you know, the only thing it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to sit by and do nothing. And, you know, I can't even consider that we're being good if we're not doing anything, because we're just like, you know, being apathetic.
But you must find the internet promoting awareness of this poverty.
Well, yeah, there's
at least amongst people who are interested.
Absolutely. Bono created one campaign. It's, you know, brought together about, I think, 2.5 million people to sign a pledge, and they've had concerts, and they're trying to raise awareness. There is stuff going on. I mean, like, before 9/11.
But I mean, the concert thing to me is like kind of like bull, because like you get people like, again, driving out there in the SUVs, sitting out in the parking lot, guzzling beer, and then going in and then thinking like, oh well, I gave $60 for this one-day event, and then they go back and not changing their lifestyle. I mean, it's better than nothing, but those kind of concerts aren't really don't do the trick for me.
And also, like, it's not anymore about like raising money. You know, as many charitable contributions as people give as individuals, it's not going to solve the problem. It's really about awareness. It's about that.
And a mindset, wouldn't you say? And like how we need to change the paradigm.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, we've got to see ourselves as people first and Americans second.
Right. So more like how see as part of a globe and not isolated. Right. Like we're over here on this continent, and not, you know, what happens over in Africa, you know, it's like a Tarzan movie. It doesn't affect me.
Right. I mean, you know, relating this to terrorism.
You know what I mean? Like how people's perceptions are determined like a lot by like Hollywood and stuff.
Absolutely.
And, like, you know, it's amazing how a lot of people's view of Africa is from those Tarzan movies.
Yes.
I'm not kidding you.
No, that's very true. You're right.
Like,
that's very true.
They think it's like, you know, Jane and Cheetah walking around. You know, they get really surprised too. Like if you show them pictures of Africa, they have all these modern cities and stuff, and actually it's a very modern society in the most case. But they have an image like it's like this, you know, like Khartoum, and Born to be Free, like the tigers running.
I know, and again, it's like, you know, and you have like so many people in the world that really hate us, and I mean, can you blame them? I mean, like with the terrorism and stuff, people hate us because we're so greedy and we're so selfish, and like, you know, we care about ourselves.
Do we really care about ourselves?
Actually, it's interesting because now with global warming,
I mean, look at the people you're talking about when we talk about poverty here. Look at New Orleans. They have 79% of the people have not been allowed back into that town. Right.
So it's like, in a sense, like the rich are controlling the media, controlling the politics, controlling what goes on.
And also like distribution of the wealth. Like that's when we have an overbloated military budget, and they were saying like, for instance, like, well, we can't have universal health care for every American because we're feeding our addiction in Iraq.
Yeah, and that's insane. I mean, I don't know if you saw.
And that's one thing I want to get back to. But Democrats, like when Hillary doesn't come out against the war, she's promoting that. You know, how to see support a progressive cause.
Yeah, well, I have to agree with you. The Democrats are far from perfect. The church, I mean, so many people think is so charitable and stuff, they're more interested in bringing prayer into schools and preventing gays from getting married
And also the
than in feeding
distribution of
people.
condoms and stopping AIDS, which is a big contribution of poverty in Africa.
Right.
And then that ties into also like how we can't get generic drugs into Africa to prevent diseases like that too. So you know, it's all kind of like an interlocking thing. You know.
Yeah, the rich, they certainly don't care about the poor. Now it seems like they don't care about their future generations, their children and grandchildren, because like poverty is not going to affect them, but global warming does threaten them, and they're in denial. They don't want to know because again, the there was a study done by an economist in Britain. It was called the Stern Report. And he determined that all that's necessary to address global warming is 1% of the world's annual income. That's like nothing, you know? And if we don't do that, we, again, risk shrinking the global economy by 20%. Now, if
So
the rich...
it's in all in our interest then to give
Absolutely.
that percentage.
And
That's like actually like wouldn't that be like the job of the politicians? But I see like we're starting to run down on our time. So if you want to wrap up, it's opposite topic. We can
Yeah,
talk
absolutely.
about
Yeah,
for
I
days.
mean, 29,000 kids are dying every day of poverty, 10 million each year. You know, our society, our world is more horrible than the Nazis have been, and the rich are pretty much leading us to something that's threatening the planet. We've got to address it.
Yeah, and even when you talk about the rich, it's more like the shareholders.
Well, yeah, but see, it's the shareholders, but then there's the rich like Murdoch who own the media, who just pretty much mold the public consciousness, you know. And
Yes, I
we've
think
got
we're
to
gonna have you back on for more topics. So it's been a great talk. Video poem. My guest George Ortega. He's the man, and we're gonna have him back on so we can help get awareness for this. Thank you very much. See you next week.